were selling subprime mortgage packages that were worthless, and they knew it. And as a result of their activities, this economy saw millions of people losing their homes, disproportionately in the African American community and the Latino community, lost their jobs, people lost their life savings. And by the way, when you talk about criminal justice, after paying a $5 billion fine, guess how many people on Wall Street have gone to jail? We do not have, what America is supposed to be about is equal justice under the law. If I'm elected president, we're going to bring back justice to the criminal justice system. Number two, your point is right. While the whole community, the whole nation suffered, the African American community lost half of their wealth. And we are seeing communities all over this country being decimated. What I believe is that we need an economy that works for all of us, especially those communities hit hardest, rather than just the top 1%. Okay? What does that mean? It means that we have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. It means that we need pay equity for women. Now, nationally, and if the women agree with that, I hope the guys do as well. And here's what you got there, is nationally, women are making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. African American women are making significantly less. The gap is much greater. This has nothing to do with economics. It is old-fashioned sexism and racism. Now, when the very wealthiest people become much richer, when you have major corporations making billions of dollars a year in profit, and in some cases not paying a nickel in federal taxes. You know why? What they're doing is taking their profits, stashing them in the Cayman Islands and in Bermuda and other tax havens. They don't pay a nickel in taxes. Well, we're going to do away with that loophole, and when we do, we are going to create 13 million jobs, rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding the Flints and the Detroits and the Clevelands, and putting that money into the communities that need it the most. If we were a poor country, we would have one kind of conversation, right? We would say, well, look, we would wish we could have a good infrastructure. We wish we could have a good educational system, a good healthcare system, but we're a poor country. We can't afford it. Let me repeat. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. There is no excuse. But the reason is, and again, this is where my politics are different than many others. Some of you will agree with me, some of you won't. But to my mind, what we are seeing now is incredible greed on the part of Wall Street and corporate America. They want it all. They want tax breaks for billionaires. They want to be able to shut down factories in America and move to China. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut Medicare. They want to cut Medicaid. The rich get rich, everybody else gets poor. And if you check my record, Dr. Colvin, it's one that has fought against all of those reactionary policies. And my policy is to protect and fight for the most vulnerable people in this country. And that means not only putting federal money into communities all over this country, it is targeting that money to the communities that need it the most. And if we have states, as we do, that really will not use that federal money in the way it should be used, we'll figure out a way to get around the state government and get it into those communities.
Thank you, Pastor Colvin. My name is Genevieve Mitchell, and I am a member of the Carl Stokes Brigade and Executive Director of the Black Women's Center. As a longtime resident of Greater Cleveland, I know many people who have experienced firsthand the devastating results of predatory lending and home foreclosures inflicted upon the American people, and particularly communities of color, due in large part to what you just alluded, the greed and criminal behavior of deregulated mega banks and mortgage companies, hedge fund agencies, etc. As part of the solution, funds were established specifically by the government through lawsuits and court settlements that were intended to help remediate some of the worst effects of the crisis. However, even though billions of dollars were dedicated to correct these problems, it appears that the monies given to the states have not translated into effective and comprehensive remedies, with many families permanently impacted who have not received restitution and have not been made whole. The system set up to repair the damage has fallen woefully short. The people of Cleveland and the surrounding urban areas continue to suffer the blight and dislocation and evisceration of what a little sense of security they once had as homeowners, to which you alluded so eloquently. What specifically would you do as president, outside of those things that you have expounded on, to make sure that those who have been victims of mortgage fraud and the whole financial meltdown are restored to dignity and made whole? And thank you so much for coming. You and Dr. West and everyone, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your excellent articulation of a very serious problem. Wall Street destroyed the lives of millions of people during the Great Meltdown. Millions of people lost their homes. The federal government has put aside, as you've indicated, money, but I am more than aware that through bureaucracy and mismanagement, that money is not getting to the people that it needs to get to. And that is unacceptable. Right? All that I can do is promise you that A, we're going to put more money into it. It really galls me that Wall Street continues to make huge profits and people in this country are homeless because they lost their homes during the Wall Street illegal behavior activities. So we're going to do our best to make sure that we streamline the process, that there's adequate funding, and the money goes to those communities that need it the most. People should not continue to suffer because of Wall Street greed. We do have to make them whole.
We've got two more questions, and we've got a question from our audience. Historically, racism and economic equality have played a pivotal role in how education has been funded in the United States. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education made separate but equal unconstitutional, yet public education remains just that, separate and unequal. This is because public education in many communities is funded in large measure through property taxes, which are based on property values. With the devastation of black neighborhoods due to predatory lending, foreclosures, and other factors driving property values down, what solutions can you offer to bring equity to public education without resorting to the privatization of education and the commodification of children?
Well, first of all, I'm totally opposed to the privatization of education. If you check my record back in Vermont when I was mayor, I led the effort to some degree, with some success, in breaking our dependence on the property tax for precisely the reason that you indicated. This is an example where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So if you have a wealthy suburban community, they have the tax base to adequately fund their schools. If you have a crumbling urban community, where homes are boarded up, they're not going to raise the property tax they need to adequately fund their schools. Look, by and large, the property tax is a regressive form of taxation. And I believe that when you have massive income and wealth inequality, when the top 20 wealthiest people in this country own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans, you know what? We need progressive taxation. We need to say to the wealthiest people in this country, sorry, you're going to have to start paying your fair share of taxes. And one of the things we do with that revenue is we rebuild communities and schools throughout this country. You know, what is at the heart of what this campaign is about? And again, I know not everybody may agree with me, but I really do think that it is immoral, unsustainable, un-American when you see this country moving in many respects to an oligarchic form of society. You know what I mean by oligarchic? What I mean by that is you're seeing a handful of very, very wealthy people controlling the economy and controlling the political life of this country. We have got to change that. Don't tell me that we cannot provide good quality education for our kids. Don't tell me that we can't get wonderful teachers into low-income areas throughout America. Of course we can do it if there is a political will to do that. So instead of worrying about tax breaks for multinational corporations who are going to China, maybe we should focus on a tax policy which can provide the necessary funding we need to educate all of our kids and rebuild distressed communities.
And we're going to close out on voting rights.
Hi, Senator. I just have one question. You had mentioned it before about the situation that happened in Flint, Michigan. How does something like that happen to any city in America? And specifically, what can you do to make sure it doesn't happen again in any city in America too?
Excellent question. Look, and this gets to the heart of where we are as a country. And this is why I'm running for president, not because I dislike Hillary Clinton. I've known Hillary Clinton for 25 years and I respect her. We're friends. We've worked together. But in my view, because of what you said, how does it happen that in a major American city, children are being poisoned? That in other major American cities, the school systems are collapsing and kids are getting totally inadequate education? That in major American cities and communities, African Americans are nervous about walking the streets of this country because of police brutality? How does it happen? And the reason that it happens in a profound sense, as I mentioned, it's not because we're a poor country. If we were a poor country, then we would understand it. But what happens is when you have 58% of all new income today going to the top 1%, you don't have the money to rebuild our communities. So essentially what this campaign is about, briefly, and I know this is controversial, and I do know this makes people uncomfortable, but ultimately what I believe we have to tell corporate America, whose profits are soaring, we have to tell the billionaire class who have more money than they're going to spend in 1,000 lifetimes, that they cannot have it all. That we as a nation cannot turn our backs on children who are hungry, people who are sleeping out on the streets, veterans who are not getting the health care that they need, communities that are increasingly boarded up. That in this great nation, and what this campaign is about is saying something very simple. We have to have a government that represents all of us and not just super PACs and billionaire campaign contributors. And when we do that, then we have the resources to rebuild Flint and rebuild Cleveland and rebuild rural America. All right? We can do it when we stand together and we fight for justice. Let me just conclude by saying, this is the last question. All right, I want to get to voting rights, but let me just say this. Everybody in this room knows a very profound political principle. Real change never takes place from the top on down. Real change, whether it is the trade union movement of workers coming together, whether it is the civil rights movement, whether it is the women's movement, whether it is the gay movement, whatever it is, has always started from the bottom on up. And when millions of people stand up and say, you know what, the status quo is not good enough. We're not going to see a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires where children are being poisoned in Michigan, where kids get inadequate education in Ohio. When people stand up and say, enough is enough, we are going to change that, that's when real change takes place.
Two final questions are with regard to voting rights, and then you have a closing statement. With the coming down of Shelby versus Holder and seeing that the Supreme Court has taken us in part back to pre-1965, what will you do using the power of your office to ensure that we don't further inch our way back to pre-1865? And what will you do to not only protect voting rights in this election, but also enhance access to the ballot for the elderly, communities of color, college students, people who are poor, and those involved in the criminal justice system?
Thanks for that very important question. You know, as I mentioned earlier, as somebody who has run for office in Vermont many times, it amazes me that in the year 2016, people are working overtime trying to figure out ways to prevent people from voting. Prevent people from voting. All right, you have my word. This is an issue that I feel passionately about. I hate political cowards. I don't hate people who disagree with me. That's democracy. My views are, very progressive, and I have conservative friends who disagree with me. I don't hate them. But I do hate cowards who try to get elected by denying people the right to vote. We are not going back. Too many people fought and died for the right to vote. You all know the tricks. Voter fraud. If you cheat and you vote twice, that's a serious penalty. Very serious crime. You should pay for it. But fortunately in America, it is not a serious problem. But using that excuse, all of these governors and cowardly legislatures have passed all kinds of legislation to make it harder for poor people to vote. In other words, you need a government established ID. Well, what happens if you're too poor to own a car? You're too old to drive. You may not have. Well, that's okay. You can pay $25 and go across town to get your ID. Well, maybe the office is not open when you go. Maybe you don't know how to get it. Can't afford to get across town. And it's not only poor people. It is old people. It is students. Making it harder for young people to participate. Look, here's what I believe. And we got to figure this out. I talked recently with Jesse Jackson about this issue. People look, we don't quite know the answer. Turns out, I didn't know this, federal government actually does not, in the Constitution, guarantee the right to vote. You all know that? It's a state decision, not a constitutional decision. So what ultimately we have got to do, and some people think it's a constitutional amendment, some people think we should do it legislatively. I'm not sure which is the best route. But you know what other countries do in terms of the right to vote all over this world? They say automatically, with all of the technology out there, you are 18 years of age. You are registered to vote. That's it, automatically. What's the problem? If you don't pay your taxes, somehow the government can fine you. So I think if you're over 18, we can know who you are. You're automatically registered to vote. And I'll tell you something else. We have got to crack down. You all remember those pictures in Florida? People waiting online for hours to cast their vote. What is that about? It's just simply an effort to discourage poor people from voting. Okay. And I'll tell you something else. You want a radical idea regarding this? All right, here's a radical idea. We've introduced legislation with John Conyers of Michigan some years ago. What about actually having Election Day a national holiday? How many people misvote? They're out working. By the time they get off of work and they have to come back, they misvote. So we need to do same-day registration. We need to extend early voting. We need a national holiday to honor our democracy and let people think about who they're voting and take the time to come out to vote. It's not radical, but here's the issue. I mean, all of you know this. Let me tell you what others won't publicly tell you. When we have low voter turnouts like we did a year ago, November. You know how many people voted? 63% of the American people did not vote. 80% of young people did not vote in November 2014. And that was great news for the Republican Party and for the wealthiest people in this country. Right? Our job is to reverse that. Our job, as I said earlier, is to figure out what is the mechanisms that we need to increase voter participation. Let's think about it. I don't have all the answers. Our goal, though, is to have the highest rate of voter turnout in the world, not one of the lowest. That I can assure you.
And our final question, Senator Sanders, and you can bring your closing statement into this final question. And Tuesday, March the 15th is our primary. Tuesday, March the 15th. Don't forget to vote. Our final question for the Senator. According to the most recent U.S. Census, it's estimated that by year 2045, white Americans will make up less than 50% of the U.S. population for the first time ever. This has led some public intellectuals and social critics to conclude that this is in part what is feeding into the movement to not only curtail voting rights, but also much of the xenophobic and racist rhetoric that we are now seeing emerging and is becoming a mainstay in American politics. With your closing statement, how do you respond to that?
I think there is truth to that, but I think there is a deeper truth. And here's what I think the deeper truth is. If you're a 50, 60-year-old white guy, and you're now working longer hours for lower wages, you're worried about the future of your kids, because your kids can't find decent jobs. You're looking around you and you're saying, what's going on in this country? Why is my standard of living going down? See, rich people getting richer, and I'm working longer hours for low wages. There must be a reason. And then you got the Donald Trumps come along. This is nothing new, by the way. I'll tell you a story, if I may, Dr. Culver. Back in the 1950s, this again dates me, that's how old I am, but I can remember that. Do you know who the lowest paid white workers in America were? They were in Mississippi. The lowest paid white workers. They made peanuts. What did they have going for them? What did the system in Mississippi give them? It said to them, yeah, we're not paying you anything. You don't have any health care. You don't have any education. Your kids never go to college. But you know what? You could drink at that damn water fountain and the black guy can't. Aren't you lucky? All right? You don't got nothing. But you can drink at that water fountain. All right? That's the way the system works. You play off one group against another group. Right? That's what's going on right now. So what is going on is the middle class of this country, through no fault of its own, you got workers out there seeing their jobs go to China, seeing their jobs go to Mexico, falling further and further down economically. They need somebody to blame. Well, in my view, you blame the people who caused the problem. Wall Street, the big money interests. Donald Trump wants to blame Latinos or Muslims or whoever. And that's what happens when people, this is not a new story, gone on all over the world. Demagogues scapegoat minorities. Oldest story in the book. And the antidote to all of that, and in a sense what my campaign is about, is to say, no, we are not going to let these demagogues divide us up. No, we're not going to hate Latinos. We're not going to hate Muslims. We're not going to hate women. We're not going to hate gays. We are going to stand together. And together we are going to address the major crises facing our country. That's what this campaign is about. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bernie Sanders.